Hey guys, I'm Naya and welcome back to the channel. For today's video, I decided to cover budget decks again. The last time we discussed budget decks was somewhere around Darkwing Blast dropping, but right now I figured enough time has passed that we can discuss them again. We have some amazing contenders when it comes to budget decks right now, so let's just go ahead and get started. I just want to quickly shout out my Patreons before we do. I'm very thankful for you guys. And if any of you want to support me over there, you can always check the link in the description below. So when it comes to budget decks, the top budget contender would have to be Flunder. Now, I do want to stress something out right now. A lot of decks overall can run Pot of Prosperity just because it's helping with consistency. And we all know that. And we also know that Pot of Prosperity is not the cheapest card around. But what I'm discussing today, and usually when it comes to budget decks, is just the cores. Because you can always pick up the core and add on top of it, as I always say in every single one of my videos. So I just wanted to throw that out there when it comes to Flunder. I think it's obviously the top contender right now. Like, Flunder has been one of the best decks for a very long time, but now with Ishizu being as dominant and with Flunder being pretty much the only thing that can counter it, it became even better just because of it. It can run D-Shifter. It can make all of these boards consistently enough, you know, for the boards to just be enough to overwhelm Ishizu tier. You have Ryza, you have Apex Avian, you have the Book of Moon effect when it comes to the trap card. Obviously, the effect where it triggers all of the normal summons during the opponent's turn, it's insane as well. The Wind Barrier statue is insanely oppressive. And just like I said, you know, the deck can achieve those boards consistently enough. And also, people don't run that many hand traps anymore since they're not that great right now. So you don't have to be as afraid of something like Impermanence and Ash on your first bird, which would be an issue a couple months back. So taking all of this into consideration and the fact that the deck is insanely cheap, I do think it's one of the top budget decks right now. So the next deck I wanted to cover is Naturia Ishizu. I'm personally very, very excited about this deck. Now, you can play this deck with Runic, and that's obviously going to cost you a bit more because Runic is an insane engine to pair together with Naturia Ishizu because it's just providing some kind of backbone to all of your plays. Because Naturia it may not seem as threatening when they put up a board. When you look at something like Mole Cricket, it does put up Naturia Beast, which is great. But for the most part, what this deck does is it just puts up monsters that are able to basically snowball into other things and puts up the Naturia Blessing in the spell and trap card zone as well. So they're able to synchro summon, special summon during the opponent's turn. And since nothing is hard once per turn or even once per turn, because those cards are just old, you know, it's obviously insane. And looking at something like Naturia Sacred Tree, it was very expensive, but after the reprint, it became much cheaper. When you look at Mole Cricket, Camellia, like everything is common, and it's just support that the deck needed to be able to shine, in my opinion. Camellia is really nice, it being a tuner, it having both effects, and if you really learn the intricacies of the deck and just play it out properly, when you're able to go Chainlink 1, Chainlink 2 with Naturia Camellia's effect, and essentially just special summon from the deck, you could say, it's really insane. And if you look at Ishizu cards as well, being paired together with the deck as they are Earth Fairies, with just merges perfectly with the deck and with the fact that you want to mill your cards and with the fact that you play Vernasylph in the deck as well, taking all of this into consideration, Ishizu is very cheap. So if you pair this together, Vernasylph stuff is cheap as well. Looking at the cards, the most expensive one is probably around $4 or something. So you can pick that engine up for cheap as well. And just like I mentioned, you know, there's so many synergies in the deck. So you can just get your hands on every single one of those engines for very, very, very cheap and play a deck that basically, like I said, puts up disruptions without your opponent even knowing it's going to happen. So if they're not that familiar with the Naturia Ishizu deck and what it's able to accomplish, honestly, it's going to surprise them. Like with everything you put up, with like being able to even go into Baron during the opponent's turn, there's so many different plays, and I do think the deck is highly capable of competing well in this current format, and especially if the pilot is very skilled with the deck. Now the third deck, and this is probably my choice when it comes to all of these decks, what I would gravitate towards, Draco Slayer is insane right now, in my opinion. Like, not only is it cheap, there are a couple cards we're going to mention that are a bit more expensive, but basically what the deck does is just able to accomplish very, very strong boards, and pretty much everything in the deck just works together so well. Bumbuko is able to get to the Majesty Pegasus, so immediately you have more starters, which is always nice in a deck with just a couple cards. When you're able to get to Beyond the Pendulum, if you have some kind of extender and you're able to keep on playing, you're going to be able to achieve insane boards. And looking at prices of cards, to get the core, it's very cheap. You know, Ignis was a secret, but even with it being a secret, it's not expensive at all. And I mentioned a couple of expensive cards. So when it comes to Bumbuku, it went up in price. But when it comes to getting a cheap deck, in my opinion, it should be somewhere around $100. So if you take the Bumbuku into consideration and extra deck cards, I do think like you're somewhere in that ballpark of $100 when you take everything together, because you can always add things. Like your end board can be pretty much anything. Like the standard ones would be something along the lines of Appaloosa, Titanic Galaxy. There's also Dweller. There's the Ptolemaeus line. Ptolemaeus is, in my opinion, you know, getting like to Constellar Diamond and all of that. I'm a huge fan of that. So that's really nice. The Odd-Eyes Seer started to gain popularity together with Odd-Eyes Archpendulum Dragon, but that dragon with only one printing is a bit more expensive. Not everyone is playing that engine. I think it's really nice personally because it doesn't take away your normal summon, and it's just a very like just quick and simple way to get to Vortex Dragon being cheap as well. Like pretty much a lot of these extra deck monsters are insanely accessible, so if you want to invest into something like that, that's also an option. But pretty much the deck, like I said, you know, it just establishes nice boards, doesn't really care about Bestios, but can run Bestios. It can also run D-Shifter in the side, which is always nice. And Ishizu cards hurt you a bit when they're milling your resources, but it's not that bad, honestly. And just you're able to search Necro Valley, which is always really nice. Although I have seen builds without it going for Constellar Diamond, so there's many different options, and that's the great thing about this deck, I think, because you're able, like I said, to get the core for very cheap and just add on top of it, just add anything that you want. Pendulum has always been one of those decks where you just, well, at least that's what I did. Like every single new thing that came out when it comes to Pendulum, I picked it up. I have stacks on stacks on stacks of just Pendulum stuff, Pendulum extenders, Pendulum everything. So if you happen to have a bunch of those things lying around because you were maybe a Pendulum player before, it's really nice to dust off those old Bumbukus and the Luster Pendulums and all of that and just play the deck, because it's very nice, very consistent, very strong, and I would highly recommend it right now, honestly. So the next deck I wanted to mention is Exosister. Now, I was looking up cards prices, and the most expensive ones are Pax and Michaelis, and if you look at the other ones, everything else is under $10. So again, you should be spending somewhere around $100 for the entire deck, I would say. I didn't exactly calculate everything, but if those are the most expensive cards and you just need to invest in those, obviously, if you want to play the deck, I still think it's just fair and cheap if you look at the deck in its entirety, because it's pretty much a hard counter to the best deck right now. With it being able to run D-Shifter and Necro Valley, that's immediately the two best things people are going for right now when it comes to counters to Ishizu tiers. So the deck itself just it seems strong enough. Like the Xyz monsters put up a ton of pressure. If you're the Ishizu tier player, you're on your toes. Like you need to think about what's going to happen, what they're going to banish when it comes to your cards, because nothing triggers when it gets banished with the Ishizu tier. So immediately you're just losing a ton of resources going up against that deck. Not to mention you have to deal with Necro Valley and D-Shifter while you're at it. And I do think like the deck might not be as strong as some of the decks on this list or as some of the other top contenders, but I still wanted to mention it because it's that cheap and a good counter as well. Like Martha was an insane addition to the deck, and it just seems as though if you really pilot it well, I don't think a lot of Ishizu tier players are going to be able to beat you. So it's a nice choice and you might want to look into that. Now for the last deck, I wanted to mention Sword Soul, and I wanted to put it on like the last place because it does struggle a bit. Since when it comes to Sword Soul, you only have a couple plays. There's a couple extenders. Like you have Moye, you have Longyun, and you have the Tanius, and that's pretty much it. So if some of your stuff doesn't go through, you're not at that great of a place. Because we all know that Sword Soul got a power crept. It's just what it is. But it is an insanely cheap deck. And if you look at its end board, it's not bad at all. You just need to, you just need to get to it. So when you look at Chisao, Blackout, Baron potentially, some hand traps, it's not going to be that easy to go through your board. And if they don't, what Sword Soul is great at is OTKing. So you don't have to drag out the game for a very long time. You can just OTK, which is nice. And you also have Berserker of the Tenier and you have the Cheating, which is amazing because, again, like I mentioned with Exosister, you're banishing cards. And when you're banishing cards, you're not triggering their effects which is always nice. And also, not to mention the burn effect. With you burning with Longyan once and cheating twice, you can OTK even more easily. So, yeah, the deck is not bad. It's able to establish nice boards, but it is hurt quite a bit when it comes to Bestios banishing Vishuda and also Ashuna. So with it being light and dark, it's not that great. And also Ichizu cards taking away some of your important resources. Like I said, it is, in my opinion at least, at the last place on this list, but with it being cheap enough and also a deck that to me feels very rewarding when you're piloting it well. And also when you really know what you're going up against and you know what the meta is with you piloting this deck, you can really know sort of which plays to make, which boards to end on, what kind of plays to do to bait the opponent and save your extenders and save your plays, establish good enough board, OTK. That's pretty much the two things you want to be able to do with this deck. And I do think if you're practicing and just, you can make it happen. And because it's insanely cheap, you're able to just pick it up and just have it as like one of the decks to play. Because the deck itself, and that's something I really want to stress, it's nice. The deck is really strong. It just got power crept in this particular format. You can keep a core and just have it and just take it out of some pile or deck box and play it a couple of months down the line, but it's still not bad right now. So I did want to mention it. And I guess I do want to have an honorable mention as well. I wanted to mention Dark World. I don't think it's as strong as the top 5 decks, and it might just be just rogue, just rogue, but I still wanted to mention it because the 3 structure decks are insanely cheap and you're getting everything in those decks. So if you invest into dangers as well, you're just able to pick up a deck for fairly cheap and you don't need to, look for an insane amount of cards in many different places, especially if you're a beginner. So I just wanted to throw this out there as an idea for you guys. If you're maybe getting into the game and you don't really know what to pick up, you might be a bit confused. There's many different options. So I guess that's an option for you as well. Like the hand loop is not bad. You're able to trigger like the looping multiple times. So you're able to hand loop your opponent and as much as that's not as healthy as we would maybe want the game to be, it's still an option for you. There's the boss monster. There's some kind of boards you're able to establish if your dangers don't get sniped. But because it's highly reliant on RNG, me personally, I'm not a huge fan of it. But still, it's a suggestion for you guys. Like I mentioned, if you just want to get into it and pick up a deck and just learn to play, basically. So, yeah, even if you're not just getting into the game, you can pick up Dark World. Why not? I guess we just need a bit more time to see how it performs and what it's able to do. So with that, I think we're done. I think those are the top 5 decks, at least in my opinion, and the honorable mention. So if there's anything I may have missed, if there's anything that you want to let me know, like what are you picking up that might be cheap, deck cards, anything, I would love to hear all about that. And yeah, just let me know down in the comments. And if you like the video, of course, like it, sub to the channel, and check out all the social media. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.